it speaks to how, as people trying to make change, we need for ourselves, we need hope, we need joy, we need relationships. So we do need to keep going back to the parts of nature that fill us, and to spend time. And Meg, when I was so busy and overwhelmed, she's like, well, have you been to the river? Have you been for a swim? I'm like, no, I'm too busy, I'm too stressed. Okay, let's go to the river. And we went this morning. We got in as the tide changed. We got literally as the moment that we were going in this morning, the water was going one way and it slowed down and it started going back. And you just feel part of something bigger.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with me, Dan Burgess. The story of Spaceship Earth is simple. We live on a life-giving rock called Earth, hurtling through space. Like a spaceship, we have a finite amount of supplies with an intelligent operating system called nature, which keeps everything replenished as long as we all respect it and participate wisely. In this podcast, I'm in conversation with folk involved in regenerating life, shifting consciousness and reimagining how we can live more beautifully and peacefully. I talk with artists, writers, activists, designers, adventurers, healers, farmers, creative mavericks, and more. Their stories invite us to participate in the co-creation of life-sustaining cultures, in service to life, becoming crew on Spaceship Earth. Greetings. Welcome to the Spaceship Earth podcast. This is Dan. It's been a little while. I am emerging into a new season of recording after an extended break, a time of contemplation. Anyway, I've been growing seedlings and planting veg and spending a lot of time in the woods and communing with the earth and trying to limit my social feeds. And I'm feeling some energy returning for the podcast. So here I am. When I released episode 100, the annual, which was a looking back and a looking forwards at the end of last year, I pulled out, I guess, the big kind of themes, the patterns of 2024 and what I was sensing that I was carrying into this year. And one of those themes was around localness, local action, becoming native to place. That the regenerative universe, as Bucky Fuller said, is created through local participation. That nature doesn't commute. That to be crew on Spaceship Earth is not achieved by studying some human-centric operating manual, but rather through weaving deeply local cultures informed by ecological and wild intelligences that sees humans as entangled beings in a diverse, mysterious web of more than human life. Now, a bioregional way of organising, as we might put it, these days. I'm committed to that personally through my own relationship with the land around me, with the other beings that I connect with, through walking, noticing, observing, through trying to grow food, through foraging, through tree planting, and now even more so through the guardianship of Ghostwood Down, which is a rewilding people and land project close to my home that I will share more about soon. I am absolutely convinced that the real antidote to passively watching this painful, absurd, exhausting, collapsing, violent, divisive globalized, empired way of being and organizing right now is by re-entangling with the places around us, with the places we call home, with the human and more than human communities around us, remembering our true place in the world by actively becoming part of our local ecosystems once again, of stepping into the mystery and mythology of places again. And that means getting into relationship with a living world around us, opening ourselves up to all that is alive and all that we have not made. So in the last couple of years, I've been involved in the emergence of a bioregional project called We Are Avon here in my hometown of Bath. If you check out, I think it was episode 98 last year, which featured the project. We Are Avon is an emerging place-based movement for regeneration here in the UK. Its aim is to act upon the interwoven crises of river pollution, climate breakdown and food insecurity and disconnection from land, and it's led by the people of a place, a diverse web of communities, regenerators, farmers and crews who are collaborating to regenerate, with an aim to provide healthy and affordable food resilience for the region, while also regenerating the community's landscapes and watersheds of the catchment area, beginning from the local level with the river and the land in the Avon Valley, centering food, river and land as powerful anchors for reconnecting people to place. This project aims to re-identify us humans as regenerators, as beings of these places, active participants responding in service to the climate and nature crisis we collectively face. Now, after a year of visioning and development, We Are Avon has launched its first crowdfunder to formalise and activate a number of community engagement projects to get going. So this episode was a live conversation which I hosted, recorded at the start of April to mark this phase of the project, the crowdfunder and a whole range of community engagement and invitations that are coming in the months ahead. So we gathered local community for an evening event. It was hosted at the Bath store of ocean and wild water brand Finisterre, good friends of mine in the podcast. And the session was themed around sharing hope and vision for a regenerative future in the Avon bioregion. And the panel represented river, land, food and community action in the local area, with guests which included poet and activist Meg Avon from Save Our Avon campaign, Charlotte Sawyer, director of award-winning feature-length documentary, which is blowing up right now, Ravon for the Avon, and Hamish Evans, regenerative farmer, prefigurative activist, and all-round wonderful human being from Middle Ground Growers, who I would say has been the lead instigator for the We Are Avon project birthing. But I'm really excited by this project. I feel it has real potential to connect up all kinds of people and projects in the area and invite wide participation from multiple folks, which is why I'm quite excited about it. There are so many ways into this, through food, the natural world, growing, conservation, community, well-being, creativity, music, art, story, learning, ecology, culture, and much more. And I think there is real energy and invitation in this, and that's what we really need in these times. And by centering the river and the health of the river and showing how everything is entangled with that health, how the health of our communities is bound up in that water health, how the food we eat, the land we can access, the stories we're carrying, the rituals we practice, and our relationship and connection to the river and the lands around it is all interconnected and interdependent. So if we can bring the health of the Avon River back, then we will have brought back the health to the human communities in these lands. And that for me feels like a beautiful adventure for these times. And it will be challenging. But as I once heard Alistair McIntosh say, it's only a demanding common task that builds community. So this is a conversation for anyone that's interested in the health and futures of our land, the rivers, local ecosystems and communities. For those curious about river and environmental action, community-led responses to the climate crisis. But really, this is a conversation about relationships between humans, communities, and the more than human world around us, about connection, mystery, and regeneration, with a focus here on rivers. As I record this, there is a We Are Avon river pilgrimage taking place, an 8-day, 100-mile pilgrimage. It started from one of the multiple sources of the Avon, a confluence of sources I think it's called. This one was at Tetbury in Gloucestershire, where they started the walk and collected some of the source water from one of the source springs to carry along the pilgrimage, and the pilgrimage moved towards and through the city of Bath, and it continues out to Bristol and then to where the river meets the Severn Estuary at Avonmouth. I joined the pilgrimage on day 5, which was yesterday, and I walked the 12-mile stretch from Bradford-on-Avon to Bath, which I will share my reflections on at the end of this episode. So stay tuned. And Hamish is doing the whole pilgrimage. He's been walking that 100-mile stretch, bivvying out at night, and he's been sending me daily audio reflections, what we're calling messages from the Avon. And you'll hear some of these weaved into this episode. As well as some song perhaps that also was captured along the way. So a little bit of experimentation going on in this. I hope you enjoy it, and hope it just shows that this is an experimental, participative, people-led, bottom-up project exploring our reconnection with rivers and landscapes as part of building and growing regenerative futures together. And I think here in the UK, more and more communities are engaging with what is a deteriorating health of local rivers and wild waters, you know, from cold water swimmers to local food growers, conservationists, nature lovers, landowners, artists, storytellers, writers, community activists. There's a growing understanding that the health of our rivers mirrors the health of our societies. And right now, we're not in a healthy way, rivers or society. There's also a growing awareness that the rivers and wild waters of our lands are really the arteries of this earth that lead to the ocean, the great blue heart of our spaceship Earth. And here in the UK, if we're to grow a true movement of regeneration across these lands, then engaging communities around rivers and land and weaving these new regenerative cultures from the ground up will be essential, and perhaps bring unimaginable joy and possibility as we go. So that's enough from me. Let's cut to it. This is the Spaceship Earth podcast in conversation with We Are Avon, with Meg Avon, Charlotte Sawyer and Hamish Evans. Enjoy.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with my dad, Dan Burgess.
Let me be like water. Let me be like water. Let me be like water. Let me be like water.
I'm Hamish Evans, and I grew up in this bioregion. I was born just up the road, and I've been like immersed in the kind of like both the environmental activism, all the kind of opposition activism, non-violent direct action, being arrested on the streets and all these things. And then that was fairly soon sort of rooted into the land work, into like the active solutions of farming. It seemed like regenerative methods of growing and food production seemed to be like the number one kind of way to actively tackle the sort of environmental crises. And then realised, farming and land work was all entwined with our water systems, of course, and my lifestyle and living was on a boat on the waterways of the Avon and in this valley on the canal. So I've been travelling up and down this valley for the last 11 years, every 2 weeks, as per the Canal River Trust guidelines. And now I live on the River Avon down at Newbridge, near the farm. So that sort of like web of this We Are Avon project is a little biased towards my themes of my life, but I also see them as very much these kind of like interconnected themes of like what we need to kind of tackle and address. It's all kind of about like natural resources, although I hate that kind of terminology, but like these natural endowments that we've been kind of gifted by the previous generations and all beings that have stewarded these lands, food and water basically, and also just the basic human needs of community connection, food, water, shelter. And all of these things have been like taken away from communities and taken into the hands of profit in the extractivist economy. So we've got these kind of things of food, land, water, community has been very much sort of commodified and taken away. And that's very much at the root of a lot of our environmental crises as I see it. And of course all the recent water pollution scandals and the broken nature of our food systems, these things are all very much linked. And so We Are Avon is kind of like not putting aside that doom and gloom and crisis, but actually facing that with an appropriate response from this kind of like community grassroots level of like what does community resilience look like in our places? How can we bring all of that, like the activism energy, into like where we are now, into making that tangible difference together, in also like a joyful and creative and beautiful way, because we're living into that future like prefiguratively. And I know like these guys' activism and work with the Raven for the Avon is just like really embodies that like creative, beautiful activism that brings in the arts. It brings in not just connecting people's minds, like the IPCC report, or like fear, there's 5 years left, but actually connecting to people's hearts and connecting to like what beautiful vision is possible when we all like come together, when we let the river sort of speak through us, and when we let the land speak through us. So actually that's Dan said I was like the source of this project, but I'm definitely not. It's just the land I've been blessed to work with through farming. And the people I've been blessed to work with, and the River Avon, which I live on and depend upon. That's kind of, more over time learning how to sort of almost step back and let them kind of work through us. I believe is the way we kind of like, move into the new world of like, imagine, as I said, it's like this vision of like clean waters, clean, abundant waters. We just did this is a tangent, but our sort of wetland project on the farm. We've got these spring-fed kind of swimming lakes and ponds and things like that, so we've stopped the sort of flooding of the lane and we've just slowed down the water, and just swimming in one of those spring-fed lakes is like crystal clear water. And I felt as well when I was in like North Wales in some of these like really untouched waters, and just how different that feels, and also how different it feels when you're in like abundant biodiversity and life and being around the bird songs returning every day, what that looks like, the bioregion actually regenerating, and how that feels on a day-to-day experience, versus kind of the counter story of just it's all decline. And there's sort of signs of hope, like there's more otter species breeding at the moment, and there's in the Avon and various things like this, like amidst kind of the darkest time for rivers, like the kind of at rock bottom in terms of like the water pollution and all these different things, but kind of because of that outrage that's kind of sparked, there's this big momentum around the UK at the moment, and around this region, around all regions. These guys have been on tour around bringing their river documentary to the people, so probably have an insight in terms of like that community response at the wider level. But it feels like there's real like lots of momentum for like this kind of water stuff at the moment. So it's kind of anchoring it in the story of place, in the story of the river, and then on the one hand it's this like vision and kind of blue sky thinking in a way of like this possibility, but on the other hand it's like this very pragmatic, appropriate response to like where we're at the moment, in terms of like food, water, all these natural resources. And if we can bring them into like community sovereignty, the impacts are huge. All the webs of relationships that happen when you have, for example, like the local food loops and the producer cooperatives, and all the kind of, I guess, the responsibility that's taken rather than it being offset to another place or to in ports and things like that. It's so it's kind of this we all have a human right to these like natural things of like affordable, chemical-free food. We've all got a sort of natural human right to like clean, healthy, abundant waters and things like that. But we also have a human responsibility to like care for these and custodianship of these for future generations. So kind of figuring that out over time and like visiting lots of cool projects like the Liège Food Belt in Belgium and the Wheel to Waves project in Sussex, which is regenerating on thousands of acres, doing a whole wildlife corridor, all these amazing projects, seeing the kind of results of those in such a short time and seeing how nature comes back like that, maybe they think, okay, we can actually bring all of that seemingly blue sky thinking into like practical action in the now. We've got much more power than we think. We might think, we just have to wait for the water companies to like change their massive thing, which they're not going to do. The pollution's getting worse every year, even though the reports are coming out. So instead, we've got to still keep the pressure up on those bigger systems. We've got to like root it in place, I believe. So that's where it's come from. And then lots of people have fed into that and kind of been inspired by all the people doing like the, food activism, the community growing, the arts, all of the wide web of things that are needed. So probably everyone in this room will bring in the different threads of that. And that creates an emerging, unfolding, who knows where it'll go, bioregional vision. And invite you all into it.
I think you've started the panel, Hamish. Just a note to panelists, if we can keep the mics a bit closer, because otherwise it doesn't record properly. There's a mic here that we'll need to share. But before I bring in Meg and Charlotte, Hamish, can you just give a little descriptor or explanation of bioregionalism, bioregions? Because I know it's a term that's kind of around, and maybe some people will be familiar. But I think, why do we feel that bioregionalism is a decent place to be focusing right now?
Yeah, so bioregion is essentially place-based. So it's a way of thinking and being and acting within that place is kind of bioregionalism. A bioregion is just the kind of ecological boundaries of a place. So rather than like defining our areas of governance and boundaries and borders and things by like these human terms and by like whether it's from wars or conquest or ownership, instead we maybe look at how these places have been kind of governed and cared for millennia. Which has been basically in like ecological catchment areas, basically around the rivers, the valleys. People used to navigate with, the stars, the rivers, that big oak tree there, that line of sight from this hill to that hill, and essentially kind of operate around a bioregion. And so bioregionalism is about kind of bringing that concept of ecological governance, but bringing that to like so many different applications, like, kind of bioregional architecture, which is like inspired materials from the place, the materials of the place, like natural clay building and straw and all the things around the Avon, or the slate from Wales or things like that. Or we can have, bioregional food systems, which are inspired by the soils of that place, the produce of place, the food of place. Many examples, probably all. I'd invite you all to like apply bioregionalism to like different areas of work. But yeah, it's basically like centering on ecology rather than like human drawn lines. And the Avon bioregion is one of like, broadly like over 100 bioregions in the UK. So imagine a kind of system of like governance and people's assemblies for each bioregion and things feeding into this national assembly, based on like the natural resource management in a custodianship way of those places.
Got it? Sounds beautiful.
Day one of the Great Avon Pilgrimage. We began our journey at Joyce's Pool, at one of the many sources of the River Avon on our journey to the sea, and we gathered the spring water in a beautiful opening ceremony, thanking the water and grieving for the water, and opening this journey. And the key reflection and musing from walking the Avon all day for this first day was really this kind of like juxtaposition of like hope and grief and regeneration and destruction, and how quickly the river shifts between the two, and how we mirrored that in our journey, and how the clarity of the river changed so quickly, based on the literal actions and management. As we'd go past a sewer network, or we'd go past a industrial farming area, and we'd really see and feel the shifts in our beautiful Avon. And conversely, when we'd found these beautiful areas with beautiful meandering and willow banks and reed beds, wiggly rivers. The river would give this like feedback and response so quickly and swiftly, and it was really powerful to live and experience this, and to experience the river growing from this tiny bubbling source into this flowing stream that it was just by the end of the day. Such huge changes in the day of a river, and it was a roller coaster of emotions, from this hope to this grief, and all things in between, and showing the power of its regeneration too.
Thank you. So we're gonna Meg, I'd love to bring you into the panel now. I guess we're starting with this question, which Hamish has given a sense of his story there, but this relationship to the river. So a bit, if you could tell us more about you and the work you're doing, but maybe also just bringing like that relationship you have, because you have got quite some relationship with this river, and just give us a little bit of sense of how that has happened and the work you're now doing around this. That would be lovely. Over to you.
So I'm Meg, or Mrs. Avon. You'll see a clip from Charlotte's film in a minute, which documents my wedding, which happened nearly 2 years ago now, where I made a public display and declaration of my love for this river, this particular river, the Bristol Urban Avon. And I suppose I've always had a bit of a thing for rivers. I grew up in Bristol and was very lucky to have family that lived very rurally in Wales and Scotland. We call this gene that our family has the faulty gene, or the blue gene, which means we're very predisposed and preoccupied with water and our need to get in water. So most of my family holidays and family gatherings and celebrations were centered around finding a bit of river to throw ourselves in, whatever the weather and whatever the state of the water. But I never thought that the River Avon was a place that you could swim. And then I left Bristol and lived by the sea in Brighton for a while, and that's where I started swimming in a more dedicated way, I suppose. I was swimming at least once a week, but most days throughout the year, and really building a relationship with the sea. And I remember thinking, oh my God, if I had grown up near the sea, I would never be able to be that far away from it. You know, it has such a power, such a draw, such an energy. I moved back to Bristol to do a permaculture course and was really interested in growing food. And I was sad about the idea of moving back because I thought, you know, I'm not going to be able to swim. And then COVID happened shortly after I moved back, and a friend showed me a spot called Conham River Park. I don't know if any of you know it, but it's to the east of Bristol, so just before the river flows through the city. And I cycled there, and it takes about 20 minutes from my house in South Bristol, and you go along this big, busy, horrible road behind the station, and then suddenly this valley opens out, and there's, you know, tree-lined hills and cormorants and herons, kingfishers, and people jumping in the water, people swimming. And I just felt really emotional that day because, okay, here's a place that I could go to. Here's a way I can replenish myself. I can nurture and nourish this relationship to swimming. I also discovered a community of other wild swimmers there. That's where I first met Charlotte. And similar to Hamish, I've got a history of activism, but quite oppositional form of activism, and taking to the streets, you know, watching police vans burn, watching statues topple. But I always wanted to be involved in a kind of campaign that felt more sustainable. And that's when the idea for me to marry the river came about. I'd heard about a thing called personhood status. I don't know if any of you know of this, but if you don't, it's about having legal advocacy for parts of nature. So it's part of the Rights for Nature movement, as we call it in the UK, which is about trying to get written in law a way to have human representatives that will be able to speak on behalf of parts of nature that don't necessarily have a voice that we understand directly. And it's kind of inspired by movements that are happening all around the world globally. There's rivers that have rights in Colombia and Canada, and the Wanganui River in New Zealand, quite famously now, has a human advocate in law. The River Ouse in Sussex, so near where I was living for a while as a student, has also started making movements towards this idea of legal personhood status. It hasn't been, fully granted, but it's happening. They've got the go ahead. So we're watching that really closely. As a campaign group with Charlotte and the other Conan bathers, we were trying to get something called designated bathing water status, which is a tongue twister. And we didn't like how complicated it was to say, so we've changed our tune. No, that's not true. We got thousands of signatures. We took it to court. All of the politicians spoke in favour, apart from the mayor of Bristol, who, if you've seen the film, this is documented, and it's this incredible piece of sort of theatre where everyone says, yes, this is a great idea. People are already swimming. People have such a strong relationship to this water. How can we build on that? How can we, how is anyone supposed to have a relationship with something that they don't have access to, or that they don't feel is safe for whatever reason to go to and get in? And I don't know how many of you swim in the water, but it's so different when you're immersed in it to have a relationship with it, as opposed to walking alongside it or being on a boat. I mean, these are all great ways to have contact and start building on that love and care and reciprocity. That's what this relationship feels like to me. Is, I'm trying really hard to help this river have a voice, but I feel like the river is also helping me have a voice. I've brought out a book of poems now called My Avon, which I've been reading as we go on tour with the film. So yeah, it's a really beautiful, supportive relationship I have with the river. The designated bathing water status was denied by the mayor. We're still trying to work on getting that lifted, and different things are shifting around in law at the moment in terms of designated bathing water status. But we are focusing this year more on personhood status. That's what I would like to focus on for the River Avon. But also, as through being on tour with Charlotte, we've been connecting with all these other rivers in the UK and zooming out from our local campaign to kind of more nationwide, bioregional, making links and connections, focusing on all these other tributaries in this movement of river action.
Amazing. Do you want to read a poem or read it now? Or? Yeah? You've got a few. I mean,
I've got a book.
Yeah, exactly. Should we hear a poem? Yeah.
So, for my anniversary, I went on a pilgrimage to the source of the Avon, which, if you don't know, is in Tetbury. I know I always want to say Chichester, but it's Cirencester. In Cirencester. And as we were walking, the access along the river is really poor. If you walk along, you can walk from source to sea along the Thames. The Wye has really good access. That's why there's really, strong communities of river campaigners, because there's many more people that have this connection to the riverbanks and the water. But the Avon is pretty hard to access. That's why you've literally got to live on a boat in order to build this strong connection like Hamish has. Charlotte lives on the river. I live close to the river. It's hard to build that relationship if you don't have access. The access is so poor that one day I was trying to get to the river for a swim. We'd been walking for 5 days with heavy bags. I was tired and I slipped and I fell and I broke my leg. that's how bad the access is. But, as is the way with this strange relationship that I'm in, a positive thing came out of it in that I had lots of time to write and collect a lot of poems that I've been writing for a really long time. So this poem is about the first swim I had back in the river when my leg was still actually broken, but the doctor said it would help with healing. So this is me swimming with a broken leg. And that feeling of getting back in the water when I've basically been sat down for months and all those muscles opening out again and feeling weightless and it cooling the hot swollen leg, like it was just one of the most amazing feelings. So this poem is called Ode to My Darling. I invite you to close your eyes if you want. It can help you connect with the words. You don't have to. My darling is a fresh lick of green between drop and wave. An artery that moves to cool my blood and my body and hours we share. I like to launch myself to feel held by you. Suspended now, but with all limbs working to keep my head above the water. This slick of life you are that even if you were cleaned and cleared, you could stop all my kicking and keep my body cold. But still now, my darling, I have missed you, being in you. How good it feels to push my skin to yours until we merge. White to green and green to white, like the thrashing stripes of a circus tent, breathing in the breeze. I pull out and wear your watermarks up to my neck. I'm circled now with these slow rings of entry. Even with all the make new skin shedding rebirth of our every embrace, the healing that comes will not stop the shit tide, the turning pull, the sag and silver of sliding time. For to love you is to love a moment. To love a moment that passes on a journey to the deep churning blue of this world of simmering salt. Thanks.
Beautiful. Should we get that a little bit back? Thank you, Meg. There are two stories on Spaceship Earth, a passenger story and a crew story. The passenger story is based on extraction, transaction and distraction, and it's leading us towards collapse. The crew story is based on connection, cooperation and participation. It leads towards regeneration.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with my dad, Dan Burgess.
Day 2 of the Great Avon Pilgrimage. We walked from Malmesbury to Chippenham, a much longer stretch, over 20 miles. And here the river really gathers momentum, so just below the Malmesbury Abbey, where we held a grief ritual, actually. The grief ritual for our Avon and for the current state of affairs, which was very appropriate for the day's themes. As we then kind of meandered through some quite industrially farmed landscapes, sewage outlets, and kind of saw the extent of some of the issues really firsthand, really felt it viscerally, being walking alongside the Avon, being in the Avon, and seeing the impacts on her waters as we went along these stretches. Also some very beautiful stretches, similar to the first day, where we saw some really beautiful land management and how the river repairs and heals and forgives so quickly. But it felt like a very different journey with the river today. It felt a really deepening relationship, and actually sort of felt this thing which is part of the intention for the pilgrimage, of this real return to relationship with water, of how it shifts from, the source through its journey. I become really attached and quite emotional now, like sitting by the river under this willow tree at the camp out spot for tonight, and just seeing this full flowing body of water, and just the amazement of how it's got here and what it's gone through, and what it takes, and this generosity of this constantly flowing. There's never a same moment. It's always a new moment of the river, and we're also just every step we're just walking a new path on this pilgrimage. So it's for such a special pilgrimage to be walking a lot of the day, actually very similar pace to the water today. So this is a kind of nice equilibrium point, and soon it'll probably get much faster. I don't think we'll keep up because we'll get much tireder. But yeah, felt this real kind of, even amidst the sort of grief and despair of some of the experiences today, like this real returning to relationship and understanding and feeling the river, both in the difficult ways and the joyful ways, and this return to relationship and belonging.
Charlotte, over to you. Can you tell us a little bit about this relationship you have and this extraordinary film that's emerged from it? And over to you.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Charlotte. I'm director of Avon for the Avon. Has anyone seen the film in the room? Yes. Nice. Thank you. I mean, I can see the Bristol Avon from my bed. My lovely husband brings me a cup of coffee and I bleary-eyed kind of look to the river to wake up, and it just brings me so much joy that I didn't know that I could find. I feel so lucky to be able to see this river every day. I'm a filmmaker who's mainly worked for charities, traveled the world, I often make campaign films. Sometimes I would jet into a country just for a week to turn something round for some news, for advocacy, for donor reporting. And I thought I'd make a campaign film about this swimming spot, because I heard about Conan bathing, I heard about this petition. But the film, it's about relationship, and I didn't really know it until I just kept on adding people to the film. I just kept on, because living so close to the spot and getting to know people, you just see a different relationship, and you just see a different approach, and every relationship is so beautiful. And my poor husband, who's an engineer by day and has been involved in this project, was just like, stop adding people to this film. You're just, because it's an indie film, and we put our energy and time into to make it look beautiful.
Should we show the trailer?
Yeah, we can show the trailer. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Can we show the trailer?
To capture the vibe.
I mean, we're going to dig into some of the stuff that's coming up, but could you? You've been touring this now, haven't you? It's showing all over the place, and it seems to be getting it seems to be landing. It's connecting with people.
It is. I think it's really. It's so important, because we've really got to turn this conversation on its head. We've got decision makers who see rivers as resources, and they have a very extractive view towards rivers, and the only thing that is changing is the groundswell of the grassroots movement, the citizen science movement. That is, we've had, Meg and I have been on tour with the film. Every person from the Rivers Trust, from River Action, are just like, thank the gods, thank you everyone, thank you for citizen science. This is the only thing that's changing. They've known since everything's been going wrong, they've known what's been going on. So it is ordinary people and us finding out more, caring about it more, that is changing things. But it's not that we're changing things because we want this extractive resource to be slightly more sustainable for our youth. It's because as ordinary people, we love nature. We're part of nature, and we have a completely different view of it. But decision makers don't have that view. I mean, in this film, we have a Wessex Water representative, and there's a load of bullshit spewed in that conversation. We've got Southern Water telling Jo Bateman, who's suing them, that she doesn't have the right to swim in the ocean. So they're revealing these ridiculous foundational beliefs that they're starting from, but we have a completely different belief. So we need art, we need poetry, we need music, we need stories to explore within ourselves and with decision makers to show that we have a completely different point of view.
Beautiful. I mean, I guess that teases up a little bit to explore this, what you're speaking to, which is this how we perceive, how we see the natural world, how we see a river, how we see the land. Do we see it as dead, inert, resource, nature? It's a thing over there. Because over the years, what we're sort of getting to, I think, it doesn't seem to matter how much information we have about the problems. They're getting worse, and there are many that believe, many indigenous cultures, but many people not long ago on these lands would have seen this. We would have seen ourselves as part of like the living world, as kin, as family, as animate. And I wanted to sort of speak to the panel about this, and I just put it out there to all of you here as well, just to sort of maybe notice during this, like, how does that make you feel? Like, when we talk about, could the river be family? Could the land around you be family? What would that look like to see the living world as kin, to have their sentient beings that we're in relationship with? What does that feel like? Does it? Because I'm really curious about this stuff. This is sort of where my work is been deepening over the years. But like, how does it make us feel? Does you feel weird? Do you feel scared? Do you feel excited? Does it make you feel odd, uncomfortable? Because I believe it's a perception. It's a way of seeing that might be the ultimate sort of breakthrough. Because I think we can keep landing more and more data, more and more information, more and more campaigning, more and more petitions. But if we still perceive and behave in a way that we see the river as, it's just a thing, or so I'm really curious. I know you're hitting on this in the film through people's relationships, and I know, Hamish, with the work you're doing, but I just wanted to open that up a little bit about maybe maybe there's some stories, but when we start to view the river through relationships, through myth, through sacredness, let's use that word that's been coming up a lot, how does that change things? Because are we likely to create policies and laws and everything when we begin to see the living world as family, as kin? Is that what it's going to take for these changes to really happen? And I don't know. So I'd love to explore, rivers as kin, rivers as family, and whether there's just some stuff that you could, I don't know, things you've learned on the journeys you're on, stories that you could share, or even practices that you are taking on. I could just drop in a little thought on my relationship to this river. I found the Avon a difficult river to have a relationship with. I think I was saying to you, I have a very strong relationship with the River Dart down in Devon. But I've begun trying to think, why don't I have this relationship with the Avon? And I think you hit access was a big thing. And actually, a month ago, I went for a walk in the dark. I took a question out on a walk that I was looking for answers for, and I walked along the river. I thought I'm going to try and get to know the river a bit more, and I went down to Dundas. I walked over the top of the hill down to Dundas, and it was the light was just breaking. It was a really dark sort of Sunday morning, and I walked along that stretch of the Avon by Dundas, which is a beautiful stretch. I'd never walked it before, and then you get into this, you walk through these fields, and you get into this kind of like it's kind of edgeland, and there's some woods, and I had this remarkable, and the river was just calm and slow, and I really had this sort of extraordinary walk with the river. I had this run-in with a barn owl, which was a whole nother story, but and then I got to the end of the path, and I couldn't continue on the river, so I had to go up this path and round, and I was on the road, and then suddenly I was on this really busy A road at 7 a.m. on a Sunday morning, and there was nowhere to walk. So I was walking along the hedge, and these cars were flying past, and everything along the edge was like vape packets, Costa coffee cups, and Monster Energy cans. And I was like I'd just stepped through a portal from one world back into this thing. But access, I think, is a big part. But yeah, I just wonder if we could just riff a bit on the, rivers as kin. Whoever wants to pop.
Yeah, I think with the film being on tour, it's been really fun because, we've been exploring, Screen the films about, the Bristol way of doing things, the ceremony with Meg's ceremony and with relationship, but then other things have been happening. The River Ooze came to one of our screenings in a bucket and it spoke. The campaigner who was on the Q&A, it's quite interesting because there's a artist based on the Y who appears in the film as the goddess of the Y, and Kim, he's the puppeteer, and he does all these gorgeous ceremonies, and we process the Avon in this beautiful vase that's been kind of fired up, and it's so gorgeous. But one of the campaigners for the Ooze just brought in a bucket and then just poured it out and pointed a microphone at it. And it's funny because it's kind of kooky and it's kind of quirky, but it's so important, it's so foundational, because it is completely changing that perspective, and it's making it clear to decision makers how different that perspective is. But Meg, you talk really beautifully about knowing the river and loving the river, so I'm just going to hand over to you to talk more.
Yeah, I think me and Hamish were just talking earlier. Maybe you all were discussing similar things when you were chatting about your relationship to river, but how it moves and changes as you change. And for me, when I decided to marry the river, I thought, this is a good story. This will get people's attention. This is about union and celebration. And Charlotte captured it so beautifully. So it's got the imagery that goes along with it. But since I made those vows, my relationship to the river has become far more spiritual, and it's a strange tradition that marriage is. It's become a very it's a huge part of capitalism. I expect it's a massive industry, marriage now. It costs a lot of money to do, but it's still a really intrinsic part of human nature to show your community, I am dedicating myself to this whole other entity of life, and all of your world and all of my world are going to come together now, and they will hopefully support this connection. And through the wedding, I've also done a couple of pilgrimages, like I mentioned earlier, with my poetry. And I don't know if any of you have ever done anything like a pilgrimage, but to do a journey with a kind of spiritual purpose or intent is such a powerful thing to do. I mean, I don't drive, which is another access issue I have with swimming. So I always try and find ways to get there by bike or by foot. And the first pilgrimage we did was actually by boat, tandem bicycle and foot, which are all very different ways to navigate the water. And then you end up at the source. And I don't know, it's kind of like the world stops spinning for a minute. And you're hot and you're tired and you dip your weary, swollen feet that don't even fit in your boots anymore because you've been walking for days in the cool water where the river began. And along the way, you've seen it get cleaner and cleaner, and you've seen otter poo, and you're seeing more biodiversity as you go away from, when we first set out in the canoe, there was all sorts of rubbish floating past us, and you couldn't see the bottom of the water. And then you get to the source and I didn't drink it. And I wouldn't now. But that was part of my vows. I did a speech kind of on the riff of, I think we've got someone from Transition Bath in the room, but I don't know if any of you know of Rob Hopkins and Transition Towns. And he has a podcast called From What Is to What If. And he starts every podcast with a meditation at the beginning where you imagine a future. And Hamish was just doing this with you earlier, but imagine that future in your mind really clearly, what could be, what could happen. And that's how we make it happen. That's how we make it a reality. So in my vows, I was saying how this river could be a means for how we get to work. We could drink the water as we swim. Pregnant women can get in there with no fear and float their big heavy bellies in the belly of the water, and kids could jump in and squirt water out of their mouths at each other, and there'd be no fear, no risk. So it's that kind of imagination that we want to capture through different forms of campaigning, different forms of creative campaigning, and different kinds of relationship building.
We live on a life-giving rock called Earth, hurtling through space. How bonkers is that? You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast.
If you'd like to support the running of the Spaceship Earth podcast, head over to our Substack and sign up. You'll get every episode straight to your inbox, weekly writing, plus other crew offerings. We're grateful for whatever you can give. Join us at becomingcrew.substack.com.
Hamish, do you want to?
I love that you brought this in, Dan. And I think it all comes back to this. I had achieved a cheeky aim of mine to say the word sacred on national television last week and said I love my river on ITV News. So the more we can sort of bring that into that main culture, but also have like the bridging language actually to kind of bring those like place-based ontologies and like philosophies, but also the more importantly, like the practice of that, like the sort of the old, there's a really nice like Maori phrase that's going to bodge it, but something like basically walking into the future with your eyes on the past, or stepping backwards into this kind of emergent future. So I think, this part of the conversation is really like looking into that, like learning from the past, like learning, I think you mentioned like the mythologies of place, the old stories of place, and also just looking at like what was here before us, before this kind of brief modern blip of Southgate and whatever else is here quite recently. And on these lands, on these Celtic lands, did some very basic research into those. There was like the old tribes of Britain. There was the Dubonnie tribe. They had their own coins and currency. They were a kind of peaceful farmer, fisherman folk, very much entwined with the river. They kind of rejected a lot of the when there were the sort of the Roman conquest and all these invasions and stuff. They were, they didn't really take up arms like many others did and things like that. So that's why they're not really in the history, because you can't really they're not in those battles so much. But looking back to like the sort of the old stories of the past and what was used to be here, and also looking at the landscapes and the river patterns of what used to be here, would have been not just like with this one single river, like there's actually almost no rivers in the UK are kind of how they would have naturally been. So there would have been much more like many rivers, deltas, like beavers would have been doing their thing and making all these ecosystems, reducing the flooding. Would have looked very different to how it does now. We're also doing a bit of a pilgrimage from the source to mouth, taking inspiration from the others. So if you want to get involved, it's from the 21st of April. And we're carrying like symbolically that source of that spring water and sort of retracing those very like ancestral steps of that, like along the river path, reclaiming the access. We're going to do it every year to kind of reinforce that access. We're going to bring it from the source to the mouth, because that's the only way to get it as clean as possible. We're just going to bring it in this clay cup from the clays of the Avon. We've got all sorts of people involved along the route, like artists, music, ceremony, poets inspired by the river. So that's like one of these ways we can like step into those practices again, because I think it's really important to like, I think I always got the like intellectual understanding of like, well not always got, but in the last 10 years understood that kind of like place-based kin, like the trees as we've got a grandmother and grandfather oak on the farm, which actually do bring a lot of wisdom and insight and calming and routine to dilemmas and stresses and things like that in the day-to-day farming. And the river itself brings lots of nourishment and inspiration, and sort of very much speaks through. So I've always sort of understood the more like in theory the place-based kin, but I think the invitation is to like really like live into that and step into it. And when you step into it, it becomes a much more, like Meg was touching on as well, it becomes a much more kind of complex, real life, nitty gritty marriage relationship. And for example, this winter I was on my boat on the River Avon, massive floods, huge tree trunks bigger than my boat flying down the stream at 50 miles per hour, rescuing a neighbour who'd somehow got in and flying down the river, and all these like crazy things on like the power of the River Avon, and because of, you know, compounded by climate change and increased flooding and the very realities of engagement with place. But the sort of ancestors and tribes that sort of speak of, they would have had a very entangled rather than a romanticized or sort of surface relationship or intellectual relationship with place. So I think the way we kind of reweave that is, you know, not by like going out there and visiting nature as just nature connection. All that's really good, but really like embedding ourselves with place. And I think this really comes from when we're actually dependent on it, when we're actually, you know, getting our food like from, you know, the land. I treat the soil well because I'm relying on my livelihood, my food, my sustenance, everything. It's not like a very, you know, the nice shiny relationship. It's a very real thing. The river, I'm very much relying on that being cleaner every day and everything like that. So it's engaging in like the real life, like nitty gritty relationship. So relationship as kin, I think I always see it in like the, you know, I love all the literature and the nice books and stuff about that. But it's also very much, you know, as kin and families, you know, the Christmas dinners, I mean, the complexities of so invitation to kind of like those deeper relationships. But those are much more like joyful and fulfilling and like real life. And beautiful and very like, you know, co-inspiring. I think like Meg was touching on, there's the reciprocity of it. It's like, it's not just how I used to swim in the river was like, oh, I go in there and this like, you know, refreshes me. It's great for my mental health. It resets my body. It really does. Like my back is really healthy and strong, even though I'm bending down and planting all day and things like that. And it feels really good and healthy and things like that. So it does do all those things. But then it took me a while to realize like, oh, what am I like giving back to that? And what energy do I put into that? You know, do I just bring all my stress to the river and be like, oh, just renew me? It's actually like, you know, what energy am I bringing to the river, and actually what conversation and action and like human responsibility can I bring to that river as well? So that's like the invitation, is to like step into the active entangled relationship. And I don't know where it's exciting. I don't know where that relationship will go as it deepens and gets more entangled and more real. And we kind of like get reminded, you know, after this crazy blip of, you know, modern times, we actually kind of get reminded of like almost place-based reliance, but also symbiosis and reciprocity. And how that kind of also brings back a lot of purpose into our lives and brings a lot of connection and community, because we also rely on community for it. We can't just individually do it. Stop rambling now.
No, it's brilliant, and it's making me think a little bit of this. I guess, you know, it's being talked about more and more, this transactional culture that we've been brought up in. All of us have been brought up in really this transactional culture, and even the natural world is often viewed in a transactional way. Like you just spoke about it, like what's in it, you know, what can the river give me? You know, I need to clear my head or whatever it is. And there's I had someone on the podcast last year who works a lot with outdoor sports communities, and he was talking about this down in Brighton, big outdoor swimming community, really passionate, get out there whenever it's there. And then there was I think that was a Surfers Against Sewage campaign that was coming to town to, to just make some noise about the state of the ocean. And he said about 5 people from the community turned up, of hundreds of swimmers. And he's just saying, like, what's going on? Do you know what I mean? It's like, you know, you should all be here, or at least more than 5 of us should be on this thing. And it's this view of this thing, and I think it is it's deeply ingrained in us. It's perceptual, so like how you shift out. But the campaigning work you've been doing, the films, it's very invitational when you're bringing people in, and I wonder whether we could speak a little bit to that as well, because I sense again it's this connection. We've had this kind of age of clicktivism, whatever you want to call it, and petition signing and all this stuff we do from behind our screens. And while that's maybe helpful, I'm questioning its validity a lot these days. But I think what we're really being invited into in these times is participating, is stepping in and learning and unlearning and feeling a bit vulnerable as well. Like, oh, what am I doing here at this thing? But I wonder whether you could speak a little bit to what you've been experiencing, and also maybe how you're seeing shifts in people, you know, when they do start to connect and come out and participate. And Hamish as well, you're seeing it, I guess, a lot through the farm and volunteering. But yeah, this difference between active participation and how it feels like it's actually making that connection accelerate.
Yeah, I think, the Marvel films where you've got the Avengers and you've got like Tony Stark, the scientist, and you've got the spy, Black Widow, and she's like more like like the PR. She's like the kind of working with politicians. And when you got the Hulk, I feel like our Hulk is the mermaid, Lindsay. It's like, we've got a mermaid. And she's a bundle of joy. She's a bundle of energy and a bundle of optimism. And she just wants to have fun. And that is so important. And we see the audience in these films. We've screened the film we've seen the River Teffy in Wales, been to the River Cam, and like up in Manchester. We've been all around, and we're still going around. And what I see in people's eyes are a sense of relief because we're reflecting on something that is lovely to reflect on, like relationship, but we're also vibing off things that are fun and the joy, and those things are sustainable because we need fun, we need hope, we need joy, and we need to understand that what we're doing is changing something fundamentally. So it's all those things wrapped in one. We need the science so much. Love it. Like in our Conan Bathers team, we have Eva. I don't know if you've seen the film. She's a freshwater ecologist. She knows the science. We've got this is the Conan Bathing in Bristol. It's kind of a small community, and we're really hoping to bring in some fresh energy. But right now, we've got who kind of works in environmental communications. We need that team. We need all those things. But we're so happy when we have Lindsay to come and bring the joy and bring the fun. But I think it speaks to how, as people trying to make change, we need for ourselves, we need hope, we need joy, we need relationships. So we do need to keep going back to the parts of nature that fill us, and to spend time. And Meg, when I was so busy and overwhelmed, she's like, well, have you been to the river? Have you been for a swim? I'm like, no, I'm too busy. I'm too stressed. Okay, let's go to the river. And we went this morning. We got in as the tide changed. We got literally as the moment that we were going in this morning, the water was going one way and it slowed down and it started going back. And you just feel part of something bigger, and you can just keep going. But the science is so important, the work is so important, everything is so important, but you do need a mermaid, you need a Hulk. Joyful Hulk.
And it just struck me, I heard someone say the other day, like, maybe talking to a tree or speaking to the river or lying down with your face on the soil is as effective, potentially more, than chaining yourself to a car or whatever it is right now. Like, there's a sense that we kind of, maybe these other things that we've seen as being not as impactful, like getting into a relationship with the river, could be way more profound if we were doing it in numbers than we might imagine. I don't know, I'm just putting it out there, but we live in weird times. I think we need weirder moves, basically.
Yes, we got that.
Sorry.
Day 3 of the Great Avon Pilgrimage, going from Chippenham to Melksham. And here the river's really gathering a lot of speed and flow and momentum, with a lot more kind of ease and clarity along this stretch. And I felt like our journey as pilgrims, today it was me and my mother walking the stretch, and I feel like we really, our own kind of journey reflected the Avons, as seems to be often the way, in contrast to kind of day 2, which was very heavy and really face to face with some of the problems of the river. Today was really flowing and easeful, and really tuned into my kind of the personal sense of belonging to this place, and really understanding myself more deeply, my roots, my connection to the river and to my source and to my mother. And really just feeling this sense of, like, I am pilgrim, and I belong here. I don't need to feel like a visitor or a tourist and these like guilty about hopping these fences and accessing the river that we should all have a right to love and heal and access. But instead feeling really rooted and proud to be doing this, and also so humbled by the river, and just wanting to walk this one step in front of the other every day by this beautiful water, life-giving source. So today was really about the flow and the ease and the belonging.
And any other kind of sort of how we've seen people on these journeys and moving into connection. I mean, Hamish, you've had tons of people coming up onto the land, beginning to help you farm, and how are you seeing that again, that connection, that participation, changing things for people in terms of their relationship to place?
Yeah, I think it's that's kind of the root of the kind of like journey and the shifts and like stepping into like that active participation place. I think you said it on the previous panel, was like stepping into relationship with something real around you, whether it's community or a tree or a river, and like developing that relationship. And it sort of happens on like a whole spectrum of ways, but there's all these like ways in, or gateway drugs of like whether it's just like sowing some seeds on a window sill or things like that. For me it was like kind of market gardening and sort of growing on a very tiny scale, sort of on a community allotment patch, growing a few cabbages for the local shop, and then that kind of way in just gets kind of addictive because it's that like regenerative form of activism like you spoke about. It's got a very different kind of cycle to it. It's kind of about like the inner regeneration as well as the land regeneration, so it really sustains people, and then they have a lot of fun on the land, have a lot of fun in community, growing food with their friends and doing the river activism and splashing around and things like that, and it engages people and it's contagious and it kind of snowballs. So I've seen that it's been amazing to sort of witness that like land journey unfold for so many myriad people, from like trainee new entrant growers that come to our land and then learn the basics of growing and market gardening and start their own projects and ripple out across the country, to volunteers coming along or like people that are traveling and on the move, and then they bring it back to another country, and kind of just like I did when I started out, I was just going around other farms and learning and sort of co-inspiring. And I think that journey takes like different shape for all different people, and we all kind of weave into it in different ways. I don't think it's like a case of like, oh, we all need to become growers or we all need to become river activists. It's kind of like finding our ways in and also looking at the people already around us and what we're already doing. And maybe it's like shifting some of the things, but maybe it's kind of like looking at all the sort of those gifts and things we have already to like bring in to the work, into that kind of like active participation. And I love that you brought in the sort of point of like just the having fun and the sort of the playfulness of it, because I think it's got to be like a really long-term form of activism. Like I see this like kind of We Are Avon project as like intergenerational. It's like this very much like slow seeds of emergence. The paradox is it's also totally urgent, and we're in this like we're in this like huge crisis of our times. And is it the Bioaccumulate quote of like we're in such urgent times, we need to slow down. And it's like it's so mad and nuts how like the pace of life going on, the pace of destruction. So sometimes I get into this thing of like actually the pace of regeneration needs to really like go, and then like we fall into some of the same mindsets. But actually when it comes from a different place of like not the primary driver being that like productivist, like go, which I always find myself falling into, partly having to run an enterprise and growing food in our economy, but also when I sort of catch myself and be like, oh no, actually listen to the river, like watch how she flows so abundantly, so almost effortlessly, and how that water sustains us just like abundantly like that. And then we step into that sort of flow and that kind of like maybe that kind of like life force energy that I think we sort of see in the film so much. Like the people that are involved in this have this kind of aliveness flowing through them, and that's no coincidence that they're involved in these river things. It's a reciprocal relationship. So I find like once we kind of like step into that kind of energy, rather than just coming from the thing of like, oh, we need to like quick double down on like activism, go, but then we burn out and it doesn't end up being as effective. But when we come from like a different place of like some sort of like grounded balance, which is really tricky to find, but that like active flow, and when we're aligned with what we're doing as much as possible, then it's almost like the productivity or like the pace of that regeneration and the pace of things that happen, just like how quickly a landscape regenerates and how quickly a person can heal, how quickly a person can regenerate. It's the flow and the speed of it, I think, they take care of themselves. So we're in the urgency, and so much change can happen so quickly, so non-linearly in like the next few years. It's beyond our imagination, and I've seen it in other places where they have rapid transformations, where food systems has just flipped on their head, like in Liège. It just like flipped from being like, they supply the majority of their schools with all local organic produce, and just in a matter of 12 years, and it's incredible how rapid that happens. So in the urgency, it's like, yes, those fast, rapid transformations can happen, but if we kind of come at it from this approach, if that sort of paradox makes any sense, which it still doesn't to me, but we've got to kind of live the questions rather than rather than knowing it.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on a point that you both made about sort of playfulness. I was a play worker for a long time before becoming a writer and an activist, and I love how water helps adults continue to play. And I know when you see people in a swimming pool, they're still sticking to their lanes and the numbers of lengths, and it's still quite sort of numerical and boxed in and chlorinated. But you can't really do that in the open water. You can swim for as long as your body wants to and lets you, and often you're interacting with other parts of biodiversity, and you have all these interactions with creatures that are other than human, or you get out of the water and maybe you have gone with a friend, and all the silly laughter that comes when you're invigorated by the water because you've just made this connection with the river again. So I love how rivers help us play, and I also think it's that might help shift perspectives, because maybe that's what we need to think about in terms of pace and scale of this campaign. Is we need to stop thinking that hugging a tree is weird or marrying a river is weird, and more that pooing in our drinking water is weird. It's a really weird thing that we do, and then we put a lot of money into cleaning the water so it comes back out and we can drink in it and then poo in it again. And I don't know, I'm a big advocate for compost toilets, which many communities over many millennia, we have, used our human manure to grow our food, and it's a beautiful cycle. And we don't need to poo in our water anymore. Animals poo in water in the wild when they're scared because they want to hide their scent, but we don't need to live in fear anymore. We've decided to settle, we're not nomadic people anymore, but we need to come up with better ways to eat and get rid of our waste and not just rely on the water to wash away all of our sins. So I think, playfulness will really help with this perspective shift. I've actually got a series of poems, if anyone's interested. So follow me on Mrs. Meg Avon on Instagram, and you can hear me chat shit.
Charlotte, anything else coming up for you on all of that?
Encouraging people to turn up and bringing more people in. Access is such an important part of that. And we had a screening in Greenwich where we had, a London swimmer. He's a young black British man, and he swam in the Thames a lot. And we had quite a few people that he'd invited, one of the organisers of Black Girl Swim, and she encourages her community, as in people who sign up to her coaching, to swim in nature. But she didn't know much about the issues because she hasn't been doing it for long. And she was saying that the more that people, specifically from her community, can swim in nature, the more that they can understand, develop relationship, find out. Access is such a really tricky, important thing, and joyful access will bring more people on to come and help in this transformational way. And I think we see a lot. This swimming spot in Bristol is so unique. It's so diverse it's people from all walks of life who swim, but they swim for a need. It's not a hobby. It's like a way of life. And I think there's a perception in England that people swim, you know, as like a hobby. But, you know, for so many people, there's a need. And I think Frank, who we're just going to see a scene of, articulates it so beautifully. And, you know, the way that he articulates it just brings more people to it, because you can see that it's a way of life. It's a need.
So we're gonna show that in a second, and then we're going to take a break. I got one question I wanted just to ask you all before we do that. We're going to see this scene from the film, then we're going to have a break, and then we want to hear from who's here, because I know a few people here, and I know the few people that I can see are all doing extraordinary, interesting things around these lands. And we want to hear from like what people are up to. And I guess the only thing I would just say as well, like for me, what's interesting about what I know about this city, there is so much talent in this city. There are so many talented people with ideas, resources, assets, money, but that's not the main thing. Talent, skills, ideas. And I think what I take out from all of your work, it's just like, it's permission to just experiment, and don't wait for permission and to be asked. Like, we kind of need a lot more sort of mischief. And I hope that maybe all of us have got someone we know that might not come to something like this because they think, oh, it's not for me, it's about climate or it's campaigning. And it's like, no, actually, this is like an invitation to bring all of the talent in, you know, to like open this up. If we buy into this dream of a place that you could drink the water in the river, which I can't see anyone wouldn't want that to happen, you know, and to open up the land and to open up access, all of these laws and policies will only shift if the pressure from the ground is building. I would love to see more of that talent getting involved in this project. But just a question I'm holding, because I like to flip between the light and the dark. That's just the way I am. But it's a question I'm really interested in at the moment, is this idea of what should we be paying attention to? Because I think we're in pretty edgy times. And I think it's useful also just to think, well, actually, what are we not seeing? Or is there something we should be paying attention to? And interesting, I asked this to a group of youngsters, late teens recently, and they were full of questions about what the adults need to be paying attention to. So for me, what the thing I'm interested in is how can we pay attention more to the younger generations? But I would love to just sort of close this, and then we'll show the thing, and then we'll take a break. But just you guys, is there something that you see out at the moment which you think we need to make sure we don't lose sight of or pay attention to?
I would say we need to pay attention to what brings us most alive, and in line with that also maybe what makes us like that little bit of nervousness or the bit of like discomfort, or that kind of like those invitations that call us in that are maybe like, oh, I don't know, that's like me like stepping into that. Like my whole life has been like imposter syndrome, like why am I in this place, like doing this speaking here or doing this or running this farm or whatever. But it's just like stepping in, with that kind of almost like mischief and non-permissionness in some senses, like in the sense of what makes us most come alive into that like kind of like life like purpose of what we're here for and things like that, without making it too big and ask. But I think what we need to like pay attention to is the little kind of like rumbles of like interest or curiosity, and like what makes us like really kind of really like motivated to carry on, because that sort of form of activism will keep going. We need all the outrage and things as well, but we need the people that are very like flowing into that work with that in all different ways.
I'd say, ironically, I've been a community worker for a really long time, but I think it can feel very, very overwhelming, particularly when you're thinking on a global scale and in terms of water, how much of our world is water, how much of your body right now is water. You know, it can feel overwhelming to think on that larger scale. So I would say focus on you as an individual and your individualistic relationship with a part of nature. It doesn't have to be a whole river. It could be a dandelion in your garden, you know, but just something for you. And if everybody just started to really grow and build on that one relationship, the whole world would be cared for. in a really nice way. So you focus on that love and that attraction and that draw and that dedication. And from that will come joy and playfulness and ceremony and reciprocity and all of these things that we've just talked about.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's great. I would say pay attention to how we talk about nature. And I love that you said on the news that you love the river. This is great. This is really important, because if it's perceived as a funny, weird thing to say, then it will influence someone, because they'll hear you say this funny, weird thing. I mean, I've made a film about people who love the river, so I feel I say that now. I couldn't have said that. I wouldn't have said that 2 years ago. I wouldn't have known what that meant, but I've explored it so fully through art and music and creativity and film and storytelling and relationship and community. I can confidently say that now. But if we start to talk about it and talk about it with people, then we'll start to change that conversation as well.
Beautiful. Should we just give a little bit of a... Yeah. Thank you very much.
Reflections from the Avon from day 4. So from this pilgrimage, we've gone over 60 miles now from the source, and now at Bradford-on-Avon. And I think the main lesson from the Avon today has been this, real magic, alchemy and transformation which happens when we allow ourselves to fall in love with nature and to fall in love with river. And this is linked to a wider realisation that has come from the pilgrimage, which was known before logically, but also feels different now that it's lived and rooted in relationship. And that realisation of this ecological self, and realising that, I'm not Hamish, individual human, as a single separate entity, but I am river, and river is connected to all of life. And it's only through this kind of re-enchantment and wonder with this that we can develop both the self-love and the love for nature. And then even an even deeper kind of truth come in, that actually it's not just that I am river, but it's that we are river. And we are Avon, in fact. And we are all Avon, interwoven in both survival and all of our needs. But it's also a reciprocal relationship, and perhaps she too is dependent on us. So I'm kind of arriving into, at the end of this day 4, and sort of coming into a more familiar stretch of the river, which I do know from cruising on my boat for 10 years. But it's feeling very different, and a new relationship to this river is just deepening and deepening every day with this simple act of walking one foot in front of the other.
So I hope you enjoyed this immersion, if you like, into the We Are Avon project, that you took some inspiration from the panel chat, from the amazing Meg and Charlotte and Hamish, but also that you got a sense of the Avon herself through the discussions, through Hamish's pilgrimage updates and reflections. And I'm recording this on a Saturday, and yesterday I took part in day 5 of the Avon pilgrimage, meeting Hamish in Bradford-on-Avon at 9 a.m. and walking back along the Avon into the city of Bath, arriving about 7 p.m. on Friday night. I think we did about 12 miles, although that feels about 20 on my legs this morning. It was a really beautiful day, seeing how the Avon runs so wonderfully through Bradford. It really felt like a river community, wonderful kind of willow sculpted resting places and open orchards around this wide flowing river, and where the access is really open and you can really connect with the river. And as we wandered westwards towards Bath, we began to hit more access problems, where fences, barbed wire, farmland fenced up, and it became a lot more challenging to stay with the river at points. So there's a lot of climbing, helping each other over fences, and a lot of nettles, and but we made our way through. But it also seemed like that could so easily change if there was effort to work with landowners, with farmers, to find simple solutions. It felt like you could cut a very simple path through and still respect farmland and other land. I also observed how many tiny little springs and streams pop up from the land and connect with the river. Like that the river is a collective of so many watery threads that contribute, and that made me think of how we can learn from that our collective strength and health is totally interdependent, and that we all contribute to that. Like the vision of a powerful, flowing, clean River Avon is only possible through its many, many tributaries, streams and springs being clean, connected, flowing and healthy. So there are all these thousands of hidden watery stories in the land that make up the Avon narrative. And so for the river, for the human community and the communities of all beings, we all carry a story to contribute to the whole. All life is implicated. All life contributes to that story, to that bigger narrative of the health of the river. And that was really my main takeout of the walk. And we encountered some extraordinary ancient oak trees along the way yesterday, which for me, as an oak geek, was an absolute joy. I even managed to get inside one ancient oak. I'll try and share the little video clip in the show notes. It was pretty extraordinary. I was kind of sucked in. And we were also joined by a 5-week-old pilgrim, definitely the youngest pilgrim so far, I think, on the walk, with his amazing mum, Hannah. And it was just a joy to walk with a group of strangers at the outset who became friends by the end of the day. And it just reminded me again how walking, particularly when we're walking areas we don't know and pathways that aren't necessarily always neat, they sort of take us meandering around areas. These pathways, this walking, it connects us to the earth, connects us to the places we live in, and it connects us to each other. It can help us let go of stuff, process things, work things through, and it allows us to see things from new perspectives. And that feels so important in these stuck times. There is so much more intelligence and wisdom available to us when we widen our inputs beyond the extremely narrow human-centered domain that currently dominates what we feed our minds and bodies with. And I learned more about where I live through this pilgrimage, more about how the river lives and all the beings that are entangled with her. I returned with an open heart and a stronger sense of place. And I would really encourage getting to know a river near you. And a pilgrimage is a great way to do that. And I think we'll be going again next year with the We Are Avon pilgrimage. And I'm sure it will bring more folks on that journey. So if you can donate something to the We Are Avon crowdfunder, please do. Links in the show notes. It will help us build more momentum around this vital work. You can follow along on the kind of socials. You can join the WhatsApp community. Again, I'll link to that. So many ways to take part. And do get to know your river or wild waters, wherever you are, a spring, a pond, a stream, all of that water is connected. And the more we step into that, the more we begin to move into this relationship, this healthy relationship with these wild waters, well, who knows what might be possible. If you've enjoyed this podcast, you know the score. Please do share it with someone. Share it with a friend. Post it on your socials. It's the only way that we really get new listeners. We're ad-free. So it all comes through recommendations. So yeah, if it's inspired you, please do share it. If you want to keep in the loop with each episode, with our offerings through Becoming Crew, the best thing to do is to sign up to the Substack, becomingcrew.substack.com, and then you'll get each episode into your inbox. You also get updates on our online and on-land offerings and other mischief that we're up to. So yeah, and if you're feeling really generous, maybe you would flip to a paid subscription, which would help us to actually support the costs of putting these podcasts out. Anyway, thank you for listening. It means a lot. I hope you are doing okay out there. It's crazy times we're living in. We need each other. We need the earth. We need to open our hearts and put love back at the centre of things. So look after yourselves out there. Thanks for listening. Until next time, peace and out.
This podcast is created in service to life, for you. It takes time, funds and energy to make. If you'd like to contribute to the running costs, you can donate the price of a cuppa or a pint. Find the link on our website. This podcast wouldn't exist without the following crew: Charlie Shred, Audio Jedi; Seaman Home Burgess, Engine Room; Willow Burgess, Jingles.